Hello and welcome to Woman Inherits the Earth, a mother-daughter podcast about the representation of women in movies and television. I am Tessa Dare, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series, The Karanzan Chronicles, and Beth's daughter.
And I'm Beth Von Baron, Tessa's mother and also a writer. In this podcast, we discuss movies that feature stories about women characters in leading roles or where the story's focus is on women or women's issues. We had originally planned to mostly look at movies that were nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, but quickly realized we needed to broaden our horizons because movies and the culture in which they exist are an ever-changing and expanding landscape. So instead, or maybe in addition, we will also look at movies that were missed or ignored, that initiated a cultural dialogue, or that we just really, really loved and don't want you, our audience, to miss.
Today, we begin our discussion of Greta Gerwig's Barbie movie from 2023. Fortunately, this film requires no content warnings, but there will be spoilers and likely colorful language.
Yes, very colorful. Barbie as a movie is a little different because it's basically a Mattel-made movie. There are several production companies involved: Heyday Production, Lucky Chap, NBGG, which is, I think, Greta Gerwig and Noah what's his last name? Baumbach. Baumbach and Mattel. So there are a lot of women involved in the production of the movie. Casting by Allison Jones and Lucy Bevan. Costume director was Jacqueline Duran. Production designer is Sarah Greenwood. Margot Robbie was a producer and actually one of the people who wanted to get the movie off the ground to begin with. She was later brought in as its star, according to Tess, just told me this a few minutes ago. Greta Gerwig is an executive producer. It was also written by Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach, who are married. I believe they just got married this year. Directed by Greta Gerwig and is based on Barbie by Mattel. A lot of the other roles, visual effect, music, editing, director of photography, several producers and executive producers are all men. And just a note here about the difference between producer and executive producer, because we were just discussing it a few minutes ago. The producer handles on-set logistics, management, and supervision, while the executive producer deals more with offset issues like negotiating contracts, communicating with investors or studios, and maintaining the business face of the production. That's not to say that an executive producer has no creative impact. So we're going to start off by talking about, we're not going to give you a synopsis, or do you want to give a synopsis?
Well, I'll just do a really brief one. If you haven't seen the movie, you should watch the movie before you listen to this, because we're not going to go through the plot point by point, but we are going to pretty much talk about everything. But for a basic synopsis of the movie is about Barbie as a physical manifestation of the concept of Barbie. She lives in Barbie land, and at the beginning of the movie, she starts to experience human failings. And because of that, she has to go into the real world, and then craziness ensues. So I have heard the movie compared to Elf, which has a weirdly similar synopsis where an elf from Santa's workshop has to go through the real world. Interestingly, that movie stars Will Ferrell, who plays the Mattel CEO in this one. I think Barbie's a lot better personally, but it is a very similar plot. And yeah, and that's pretty much it. Most of the movie is sort of, it's more about the themes and the character development and kind of what it is to be human and to face your own death. This is a Barbie movie about death.
It is totally a Barbie movie about death in some ways. In other ways, it's about life. It's also about embracing your humanity and what it means to be human. And what it means to grow and develop. There are a lot of themes in this. We could start with the opening narration for just a minute or two. I just have a couple things to say about it. It's a very interesting opening. There's a story being told. Helen Mirren is our narrator, our omniscient voice narrator, and she is amazing. And I'm sitting there in the movie the first time I watched it in a movie theater, had to get my phone out and find out who's the damn narrator because I recognize his voice. And it was Helen Mirren. She's wonderful. And the story, she's telling the story of Barbie and how little girls have been playing with dolls as long as there have been little girls. And but mostly those dolls were baby dolls, which means that little girls were pretending to be mothers.
Yeah.
So when Barbie came along, that all changed. We now have, a whole world, 60-something years of dolls that are career focused or are artists or, they just have real potential real lives that little girls can interact with, engage with, and be creative with. That was not something that happened before 1959, which is the year Barbie was introduced. Barbie is just a year younger than me, so I feel like I have grown up with Barbie, even though I did not play with Barbie when I was a little girl. That's something we should throw in here. You played with Barbies a lot, and I was not very doll-focused. I don't know why. I just had no interest. My mother loved dolls. She bought me every doll she could find, including a whole bunch of Barbies, several of which I still have. Just never really took off for me, but we are the same age, and so the opening narration is about that. And it's set on a landscape that is reminiscent of the opening of 2001: A Space Odyssey by Stanley Kubrick. In fact, there's some music at some point that you can hear the bum 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 music that goes along with it. And I think it's a wonderful opening. It is definitely for someone like me who loves movies and has never loved Stanley Kubrick, except for Spartacus. He gets kudos for Spartacus, one of my favorite movies. But other than that, his experimental approach to filmmaking has never been my thing. I think if you're a visual artist, you love him. But if you're a visual person, you love him. But if you go to movies for the whole thing, the visual and the storytelling and the dialogue and the character development, if you want that whole package, Stanley Kubrick doesn't deliver it, in my opinion. I know that's going to make a lot of, maybe we don't have a lot of men who listen, but I think he tends to be a director that men love.
Yeah.
So sure. I'll just leave it at that. But anyway, so the narration is talking about Barbie and what she is to little girls. She, thanks to Barbie, this is a quote, "All problems of feminism and equal rights have been solved." And then she says, and I'm thinking, because Barbie can be all of these things, can women be all of these things? That's one of the questions. But anyway, so she, goes on to talk about that, and then there's kind of, how does it end? There's an abrupt ending where first of all, she winks at the little girl. That's a great visual. They're playing and they look up to her. She comes along and she's in her swimming suit, the famous black and white swimming suit, and she kind of pulls her sunglasses down and winks at the little girls as if to say, you're in on the secret now. Yeah.
Well, then it actually goes to the visual, or one of the visuals that I want to talk about, where it kind of cuts to this this blank white canvas, and then it shows you a bunch of different Barbies throughout the years. Yeah. And immediately in the theater, it kicked off my nostalgia, because one of the Barbies that it showed, and in the first spread on the far right, there's a Barbie in this pink princess dress. I didn't have that Barbie, but I had the McDonald's toy of that Barbie. And I remember it so clearly. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh my God, I remember that McDonald's toy. And that's actually, I think you kind of covered everything about the intro, but that kind of brings me to one of the points that I want to make about the movie. It's been made before, but I just want to echo it. Visually, this movie is a masterpiece on multiple levels, both the level of just sheer completion, but also the many thousands of ways that it hits on these nostalgic notes. That Barbie, when Barbie wakes up in her dream house and she's under that shiny blanket, I remember that material so well. Even Midge, Barbie's pregnant friend, I remember that. I don't know if you remember this, but I guess we can just call her Liz. My friend Liz had that Barbie. She had the Barbie that was pregnant, and it was weird. And we would just kind of look at this doll and not really know what to do with her.
Well, and the thing that I wrote in my notes about that is, pregnant Barbie was discontinued.
Yep. Pregnant Barbie it was a weird doll, because you could you could open up her stomach.
Little girls.
Yeah, you could open up her stomach, and then there was like a little
A little
baby in there.
baby.
And it was just bizarre. Like, it was sort of weirdly surgical. So we were, like, fascinated with pregnant Midge, but definitely kind of disgusted by her as well.
Well, and there's the visuals that they go on almost in every scene where they reintroduce Barbie after cutting away to another character. They come back to her and she's in a new outfit.
Yes.
She changes outfits, I'll bet 10 times in the first 10 minutes of the movie. And that's another hail to, nostalgia. I think they do a very good job with that.
And there's a line about it. She's at one point when later in the movie, when she's brought Gloria and Sasha back to Barbie Land, she's like, we can go to my dream house and change our clothes again. Because that's part of the point of playing with the Barbies, changing her clothes a million times.
Changing her clothes. And this sets us up to think, oh, Barbie is just a silly little thing. It's just a fashion doll. Girls just like to have fun. Girls just like to be pretty. Girls just like to wear pink and dress up and wear heels that make our feet hurt. And so this is a setup. This is going on as a setup where you're thinking this movie is not gonna do anything, and then it just kind of turns it on its head. But I would like to say something about Ken real quick here too. Is that a muscled chest suit that he's wearing? I mean, it looks pretty fake, right?
I think it's contouring. I think he's just got a lot of makeup on to make it look more extreme. I don't think it's a whole fake chest. I think it's just they've kind of painted him with makeup to make it look a lot more than what it is.
And during these opening scenes, it's very clear to me that we are not supposed to like the Ken dolls the way we like the Barbie dolls. The Barbie dolls are dynamic, they're colorful, they're talking, they have dialogue, they interact with each other, and the Ken dolls are just, I'm not even sure what they are. They're just Ken. Flat. They're flat. They're just Ken. Yes. Yeah, I'm just Ken. They're very flat. And I don't think we're supposed to. That's a huge contrast, and it does get flipped later on. But it calls into question one of the themes of the movie, which we'll get to later on.
And it is reminiscent of how girls actually play with their Barbies, because
nobody wants a Ken doll.
Exactly. My friend and I, we had like tons and tons of Barbies. We had 2 Kens, and that was it. I remember distinctly their main role. Because, like, I remember the kinds of stories that we would generally, like, come up with for the Barbies. And generally what we did was the Kens would get kidnapped and the Barbies had to go on an adventure to save the Kens. That was the main story that we would do. So that was basically, we would just, like, throw the Kens somewhere in the far end of the room, and then the Barbies had to go on an adventure to find them.
And I knew that you guys were creating these elaborate storylines, and I've told people for years that was the beginning of you as a storyteller. I could see it even then when you were 5 and 6 years old. But I would listen to these elaborate stories for about a minute, and then realize I can't keep up with these 2 and walk away. They were very creative.
I mean, I think there's kind of a combination of things happening there, both that we're kids doing kid play, and kid play is off the wall, but also we were best friends, so we probably had like a million different inside jokes that we didn't even know were inside jokes, but yeah, I mean, that just brings me back to this movie did such an incredibly good job of capturing that nostalgia, but also not resting on that nostalgia. The nostalgia is like there is this beautiful backdrop, and it kind of I actually think, you were saying that it makes you think that the movie's not going to be any more than that. I do think for some people that's true, but for me, I think it actually kind of opened me up to having a more emotional experience, because it kind of brought me back to being a child in a way that almost no other movie has ever done, because no movies are about female childhood nostalgia.
Yeah, that's a good point. A lot of movies about boys as children and tweens and teens.
I mean, the Transformers franchise.
Yeah, and what is the movie that comes to mind when you think about teenage girls? Mean Girls.
Oh, yeah, Mean Girls, yeah. Maybe Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, if we want to go with another America Ferrera
movie.
That's
a good... I've never seen that, but have I? I think I did finally watch it when you encouraged me to see it, and I think I did finally.
Yeah, I read the books, And so I did watch, I think there were 2 movies. There were like 4 books. I did not read all of the books because they got kind of repetitive at a certain point. But the first book was really good, and the first movie is really good too. It's also got, I mean, it's got a bunch of people. Actually, maybe we should do Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants. We should. It's got Rory from Gilmore Girls, Alexis Liddell, America Ferrera, Blake Lively, and how am I forgetting Joan of Arcadia's actual name?
And her dad is an actor, so I should be able to come up
Tamblyn, with Amber Tamblyn. There we go.
Yeah, Amber Tamblyn. Russ
you
Tamblyn
said her dad, and somehow I remembered Russ Tamblyn's name first.
Yeah, and that's anyway. How I remember it too. He was in West Side Story, was his big claim to fame.
But yeah, there's a ton of movies that are about like boy childhood. I mean, Stand By Me, Transformers is nostalgic to boy toys. Sonic the Hedgehog, that's a boy nostalgia movie.
Well, so this opening scene, this is actually the second opening scene, the opening scene with the 2001 landscape. But then we get this opening scene where there's actually a Lizzo song playing over everything. And I actually thought it was Pink at first because I have closed captioning on my television and I didn't notice it when I was in the theater. But then when I was watching it last week again, it said Pink. And then it went right into the lyrics, and I didn't realize that Pink was the title, so I was thinking it was Pink the singer.
Oh, you thought it was Pink the artist? Okay.
But then at some point I realized, no, that's Lizzo. That's I don't even know how I knew it, but I knew it was her. Anyway, so she's singing over it, and the opening scene is Barbie saying things like, "I worked hard." All the Barbies are sex. When we talk about Barbie in this movie, every Barbie is named Barbie, so it's hard to distinguish. Which is why we might sometimes refer to them by the actor's name. But different Barbies are doing a lot. There's a lot of self-affirmation in this opening scene.
And a lot of woman-to-woman affirmation. There's a lot of like
I deserve this. I worked hard. You look pretty. Yes.
Yeah, they show basically a whole world run by women. It's a whole world run by Barbies. And they show like the president in the White House, and she opens up her meeting by saying, "Everyone turn to the Barbie near you and say something that you like about them and tell them that you love them." It's like it's very warm and happy.
Yes.
And self-affirming, but also kind of, I mean, for lack of a better term, sisterhood affirming. You know, it's also like the Barbies all love each other and they want each other to love themselves.
And it's a little lacking in depth. We'll be honest about that.
But it's also hilarious.
It's hilarious. It's superficial, but it's hilarious and it's sweet. So we get to this point and they're all talking and thinking, and all of a sudden Barbie says, "What is the expression she used? Do you ever think about death?"
Oh yeah. Do you guys ever?
Do you ever think about dying?
Yeah. That's and that happens during our so we open with the Lizzo song, and then we get this whole intro, and we get the intro to Barbie and the fact that Ken only really exists when Barbie looks at him, and then we get the big dance number. Ken asks if he can come over later, and she says, "Sure, I guess. I don't really have anything big planned except a choreographed number with a bespoke song." And then we go to her party at her house. And that's when that line happens. It's a Dua Lipa song. He
can't come over because every night is girls' night forever. That's a line. And then she does that, and she wakes up. That's what happens. It's the next morning. She wakes up and she's not in a good mood. Her breath is bad.
Well, she does say the line before, so that there.
Does she? Okay, so that's the first clue we have. It's in the middle
of the big disco number. Yeah, in the middle of the big disco number, she stops and she goes, "Do you guys ever think about dying?" And everyone stops and like kind of stares.
I mean, literally, there's a song going on, and it feels like there's a record scratch. Full stop.
Yeah. You know, like... Yeah, basically. Yeah. Yeah, and then I think she covers by saying like, "I'm dying to dance," and then they just keep going.
That's what she does. That's what she does. But then she has a good night's sleep. She goes to bed. She says, "I'm definitely not thinking about death anymore." But she wakes up the next morning, not in a good mood. This is what she had, the bad breath, cold shower. Her milk is sour. Now, admittedly, in the first scene when we see her doing these things, waking up and taking a shower and drinking milk out of the carton, none of this has actually happened. It's, the carton is empty. Yeah, there's no water coming out of the shower. And that
imagination.
It's imagination. It continues to be true, but you can see that she smells her breath. It doesn't smell good. She wakes up and her hair is not perfect.
She jumps in the shower because it's cold, even though there's no actual water, but it's imaginary cold. Yeah,
yeah. She screams because it's cold. Yeah. Her toast is definitely burned.
And the Lizzo song turns on her. The Lizzo song
Yes.
suddenly gets dark.
Oh,
There's
girl,
a part,
you okay?
yeah, and there's a part in the song twice where Lizzo spells pink, like Pink, and each time each letter like stands for something. And in the first verse, when everything's going well, K stands for cool, but then after everything is going badly, K stands for death. So. It's just one of the, which I want to point that out in part because it's just like, you could totally miss it because it's the song. And that's part of what's kind of funny about this scene is the Lizzo song is commenting on everything that Barbie is doing.
As it's happening, as it's evolving, as it's changing.
Yeah. But it still sounds like this cool, like hip. I mean, it's Lizzo. It's great. It's like fun to listen to. So you can sort of like, you can either pay attention to it or you can let it fade into the background. And that's why if you do notice the K, death, she still sounds like just as happy and like fun as the song has sounded the whole time, but she's saying death. It's this great moment of dissonance that's also this moment of like layered humor, because again, you could just be ignoring the song and not notice it at all, but it is there. It's this extra layer of jokes.
And everything that was beautiful and wonderful and positive in the previous scene has now completely flipped on its head. So, she falls because she's just not coordinated anymore. She's embarrassed. Her feet are flat. That's a major turning point in this scene, and it's a visual one. You can see her feet collapse. And she does not have a context for this. She says that. I don't have a context for this. And other Barbies are not supportive. All of a sudden, they're retching. I mean,
they try to be. They want to be. But then when they see that it's a real problem, they don't know how to deal with it. So she goes to see Weird Barbie. There's one of the Barbies tells her that she's malfunctioning, and but she's like doesn't know what to do with it because she says malfunctions are usually just hair related.
Even the hair-related malfunctions are usually brought on by the owners who play with them and mess with their hair and then can't get it back the way that the way it came originally. That's what I remember about the Barbie dolls. It was so much fun to play with their hair, but once you start, you can never go back. Their hair never is the same again. I don't know what they do in the factories, but it's never the same again, and that's disappointing. So then there comes a time in your life with Barbie, in those 2 or 3 years as a child, where you're playing with Barbie, where you get to a point, should I play with the hair? Because it's going to mess it up permanently.
The thing that I remember is a lot of Barbies come with their hair in a ponytail, and if you ever take the ponytail out, there's like a permanent crimp where the ponytail used to be. So there's always this like, it sort of goes back from the head and then there's a crimp and then it's like straight after that. It's very strange.
And, I'll just interject a little story here about your introduction to Barbie. I was not going to buy you any Barbie dolls. And that was mostly because I had not really enjoyed them as a child and I didn't know whether you would or not. And I was still kind of thinking, as a strong feminist, I don't want to put this on her. She may not like Barbie. I don't want her to think that Barbie is what she needs to be. So you were 4 years old. Birthday parties at that point were mostly friends and family. Friends come over. I think this was Barb and Roy. I can't remember anymore, but I think that's who it was. Gave you your first Barbie doll. I had to turn away and not look disgusted.
Are you saying Barb gave me a Barbie?
I think she did. Well, you have to understand they had 2 boys at this point, and they went on to have a third boy. So she never got her girl. And she was one of 2 friends that I had during those years who had 3 boys. So she loved being able to give you a Barbie doll. Yeah. That Barbie doll, and that was just the first one. I mean, after I saw how much you loved it, we went in, we went all in. We started buying Barbies and stuff and whatever. But that first one, you would not believe, she looked like Weird Barbie. We're gonna be talking about Weird Barbie in a minute. You cut her hair, you colored her face with crayons.
Yeah.
And eventually we lost her body because her head popped out, and all I had left was the head and the hair.
Oh, she was the one that I put on a different. Was she the one that I put on a different body at some point? Because I did have a Barbie that I was okay. Yeah, I was like,
that was your first Barbie.
Her.
And I wanted to keep that head, just because I wanted you to see when you were 40 years old what you had done to your first Barbie.
Oh God, I didn't. That is actually bringing back a memory for me. I do remember that I had a Barbie where her head had come off, and I think we lost her body, and I basically decapitated a different Barbie and shoved her head back on the neck so that I would still have her.
She looked like Weird Barbie in the movie. She had those kind of when I
first saw this.
When I first saw this in the theater, I laughed my ass off. So I thought, whoever designed this Weird Barbie has had a child who did this to her, because it must be universal, because that's exactly what yours looked like.
I feel like part of what I appreciated about Weird Barbie in the movie was that I feel like so often culturally we don't talk about, like, you know, there's this cultural narrative that, like, boys like trucks and to be loud and destructive, and girls like Barbies and to be dainty and quiet. And I'm just like, do you know what we do to the Barbies, though?
Yes, exactly. We operate on these Barbies. We experiment on these Barbies.
Yes.
We try out our artistic skills on Barbies. We decapitate Barbies. There are all kinds of crazy things little girls do to Barbie dolls that you would not believe or probably even understand if you hadn't seen it firsthand. And whoever did this in the movie, whoever was responsible for designing Weird Barbie, got it right.
Did an absolutely fantastic job. I'm assuming it's Greta Gerwig. She knows what she's talking about. She knows how girls play with Barbies. And yeah, it's just, you know, just because little girls are drawn to things that are shiny and pink and look a certain way doesn't mean that little girls don't have a destructive streak. We all did. That's part of being a child. That's part of figuring out the world, is destroying it.
It's part of using your imagination to see how far you can take it, to see how far you can go, to push the limits. And girls do it as well as boys. And to say that only boys do it is a great disservice to little girls, because it doesn't allow you to grow up, to experiment and grow up and learn from your mistakes the way boys do. But fortunately, you had a mother who completely understood your destructive tendencies and let you run with it. Go ahead, destroy that, decapitate that Barbie.
Okay, so I do want us to talk a bit more about Weird Barbie, but I feel like I have, like, a really small point that I want to make, and now seems like as good a time to make it as ever. This movie had a huge impact on fashion this year. Huge.
Really?
Like, the second it came out, and okay, like, confession time, I am, like, addicted to looking at clothing websites. Definitely my biggest like addiction is, if I'm bored, I will just, like, go and look at, like, clothing websites. I have, like, a handful that I really like to look at. I like a lot of goth clothing websites, but also sort of like fake vintage. And several of the websites that I went to almost as soon as the movie came out started selling some variation of the, like, pink gingham dress that Barbie wears at one point. That was the first wave. But then at New Year's, I did some, or like in the lead up to New Year's, I did some searching around to look up, you know, what people are wearing for New Year's this year, and almost all of it was gold jumpsuits like they wear in the dance scene. Like, it just everywhere, gold jumpsuits. The fashion impact of this movie, I feel like, cannot be overstated. I don't know if you did you go to see it in the theater?
I was going to say, I think I know what you're going to say. I was going to say that the opening weekend, when girls and older women
and gay men.
Women and gay men and young girls all went to the theaters dressed up. You went to the theater dressed up, right?
Yes.
So when I went to see it, I went a month later, or maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, when it had been out for a while, and there were still women dressing up for it. And I remember at the end of the movie, I came out, I just wore a blue top and blue jeans, and I was washing my hands, and this woman, you know, comes out of the stall, and she's kind of humming, and I said, it was a good movie, wasn't it? And she's all dressed in blue, and she said, it was the best movie ever. And we just had this kind of bonding moment, and it's like, and we were both, like, laughing and giggling, and it was a really, really good movie. But I saw it 2 weeks late, so.
I went to the theater twice to see it, because I went with my husband on opening weekend, and we both had a fantastic time. He loved it. And then a couple weeks later, he was traveling for a weekend, and I was like, what am I going to do by myself this week? I'm going to go see Barbie again. So I went to see it a second time for myself, and had as much of a fantastic time. I mean, the first time was probably unbeatable because it was opening weekend and everyone I love when you see a movie in the theater and you can just tell that everyone in the theater is having the time of their lives. Like everyone is laughing at every joke. You're missing some dialogue because people are having such a good time, that was great. Both times that I saw it, and maybe I should have saved this for when we talk about the speech, but both times when I saw it, people were sobbing at the speech.
Yeah,
and the second time
we'll get to the speech in a minute, but it was
it was just such a fantastic communal experience, and that is related to the fashion because a lot of people were dressing up to go see it. I didn't dress up in all pink, but I have this kind of campy, I like to call it my bisexual on vacation shirt. It's like a Hawaiian shirt, but it's like bright teal, a blue and pink and purple. And so it's like in the color realm of Barbie in terms of like the brightness of the colors, and it does have pink in it. So I wore that to go see it. Also, it was a summer movie, and that's one of my summer outfits.
I think the opening weekend and the first few weeks of the movie and the articles that came out, people talking about it, it was like an American love fest for Barbie.
Yes. Yeah. And I did want to say, or I wanted to bring up, as you know, but our listeners may not, I follow a lot of drag queens, and two of my favorites are Trixie and Katya, and Trixie made a point around the time that the movie came out that I have thought about a couple of times, which is this movie might create a trend of women dressing in pink the way that goths dress in black.
Oh, yeah.
I think she's right on the money. I feel like it is happening more and more because that was the other thing. All of the, when I was looking at New Year's clothes, it was all either gold jumpsuits or bright pink stuff.
And I will tell you, as someone whose coloring works really well with pink, it's been difficult my entire life to find the kinds of tops and dresses and stuff that are pink that look, because that's a good color for me, because some years all you can get are black and green and gray, and there's just no pink out there. This spring the catalogs are starting to come in for spring, and pink is heavily favored, and I am so happy about that.
So one little point that I wanted to make, we don't have to spend that much time on this, is I wanted to talk about Magic Earring Ken. So there's a point later in the film where most of the Barbies have been brainwashed, and we can go back and talk about that if we want to. But in Weird Barbie's house, in her weird house, instead of a dream house, she has a weird house. Some of the outcasts are hanging out because they have not been brainwashed, and those include two discontinued Kens, one of which is called Sugar Daddy Ken, and the other one is Magic Earring Ken. Sugar Daddy Ken is fairly self-explanatory. He has a dog named Sugar, and he's Sugar's daddy, and they just were a little unaware that Sugar Daddy is its own term that means something very different. Magic Earring Ken, it has a little bit more of a complicated story, but it is a similar issue about basically Mattel being a little bit unaware but trying to be cool. And I will credit my knowledge for this to Dan Savage of The Stranger, one of our great gay historians at this point. Yeah. Dan Savage. He as soon as Magic Earring Ken came out, he published a column making fun of it because, you see, Magic Earring Ken's earring is not an earring, it's a cock ring. Yeah. So apologies for the language, but basically what happened was some people who worked for Mattel went to try to figure out what was cool and ended up observing what club kids were doing and what club kids were wearing. And what they didn't understand was, at the time, club kids either just were mostly gay or were getting their fashion from gay people, and gay men had started wearing cock rings on necklaces as like a fashion statement, but also, as this kind of countercultural sex in your face statement. So they'd be wearing these like see-through mesh shirts and a necklace with a cock ring on it. And so the club kids started wearing it too, and people at Mattel saw the club kids wearing it, and just thought, oh, that's a cool outfit. And didn't connect what it actually was. So then they produced Magic Earring Ken, who has a cock ring on a necklace. And here's the thing, I am pretty sure that Liz had that outfit. I remember that outfit. I remember the mesh purple.
Your friend,
yes,
your friend
my
Liz,
friend.
yeah.
Yes, my friend Liz, my Barbie friend, the friend that I played Barbies with. I am pretty sure. I don't think she had the actual Ken because we didn't have a lot of Kens, but I think she had the outfit, like she'd gotten it from somebody who didn't play with Barbies anymore. Because I remember the purple mesh shirt and the weird necklace, and even as a child thinking, I don't normally see boys wearing necklaces.
But you know what the odd thing about that is you would think for every single Barbie that went into production, it had to be vetted and screened, and they would talk to different kinds of people, get input. But they did not get any input from a single gay person or a single person who understood what a cock ring was.
Not in the early 90s, no. But I mean, I think that was Dan Savage's point, was like, they clearly did not ask a single gay man, because a gay man could have told you in a second.
A single woman who was familiar with gay culture. I mean, it wouldn't have taken much. I mean, maybe it would have. I don't know. But I mean, and that is not something I would have noticed. You noticed that because you are you go to drag shows and you're into this culture, and you read Dan Savage a lot. I do subscribe to the email version of his newsletter, but I would never have picked up on that.
Yeah, never. I mean, well, around the time that the movie came, I mean, first of all, I remembered the outfit, so I started looking up what the story was there. And I came across the story from an old, well, I think Dan Savage actually reprinted an article where he talked about it. But yeah, he had, like, in the 90s when this happened, he had written about it. But yeah. So that's just, I think that's basically, I mean, that tells you how conservative and kind of secluded these boardrooms can be, you know, and also how underground a lot of popular culture can be, especially before the internet, you know, prior to the internet, when so much of this just kind of happened by word of mouth and, like, you know, seeing people on the street. You know, that there wasn't like a written history that could tell you. Could ask any gay man or really any gay person, and they could probably tell you, but there was no encyclopedia of fashion to look up to see what this was about. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about that very briefly, and now we can.
And getting back to Weird Barbie, that's great information, because I think that it speaks to how this film is so thorough. They covered so many Barbie stories over the decades, and that's really impressive. The whole Weird Barbie scenes, that's kind of a transitional point in the film, right before we move from the fantasy world of Barbie Land to the real world, where Mattel is making decisions about the Barbies and their lives by a complete board of directors made of completely of men. All men. No, not a single woman on the board, even though the creator is a woman.
Also, when they first show Mattel's headquarters, they show that like the FBI calls a guy at Mattel, and that whole room it's almost like the Barbie version of an office, because it's all it's kind of antiseptic. It's like extremely clean, but completely blue. All of the men are wearing like a blue sweater vest and khakis. So it's like this boring, muted blue. So the exact note that I wrote was, Mattel's headquarters are unreal, but masculine and boring instead of feminine and pink.
Another thing about and I'm not sure if I wrote this down or not, when she gets to the Mattel headquarters, the building that she walks into is a real building. It's a bank building in Los Angeles. I want to say it's U.S. Bank, but I could be wrong about that. But anyway, the Calder that's in front of it, there's a Calder sculpture that is one of, it's Calder 4 is what it's called, number 4. There might be more than 4 sculptures that are very similar, but they're red. They kind of look like a spider. There's one in Chicago. That's the first one. In fact, I have pictures of you as a toddler climbing on the Calder in Chicago. but there's one in Los Angeles, and it's a bank plaza that's in front of it. So the building is correct, and they chose that building, I think, because it's so tall, it's so linear. It's like it's narrow and tall, and it goes up and up and up, and the Mattel boardroom is at the very top of the building, and that's just the exterior scenes that were filmed there. But it's not Mattel, although it superimposed a big Mattel sign on it, and you can tell not when you first enter it, but when they show it the second time, you can tell that the Mattel sign has been photoshopped into the picture, imposed on the picture. But anyway, but that's a really that's a visual thing that was interesting to me, but also that there were no women at the Mattel table. That was in fact, she walks in, she says, "I'd like to meet the woman in charge."
Yes, she does.
And so they say, "Well, there are no women in charge." And then she says, when they try to put it, was it when they try to put her in the box? And she says, "I remember," or maybe I'm not sure when it happened, but she said, "I remember the smell, having a real Proustian flashback." Remember Proust, Barbie? That did very well. That did not sell very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
I think that is when that happens.
I know. I'm not sure if there really was a Proust Barbie,
I doubt it.
It's very funny, and the chase scene that happens after that, because when she comes to visit the board, they want to put her back in the box because they realize that everything has been turned upside down, topsy turvy. Mm-hmm. They think the way to get to right things is to literally put her back in the box. Let's put it back in the box. Let's put the trouble back in the box. And so they try to put her into a Barbie box, not realizing that that's not going to solve her problem. They can't do it anyway. Her problems are that she is relating to who we thought, to her owner, to the little girl, quote unquote, who played with her. We don't come to realize until later that's actually the mother who had Barbie. But at this point, and I think this is the fascinating part of the book, or the movie, excuse me, we're watching a movie here, not reading a book, but the fascinating part of this is that we assume it's the girl who's a tween. She's junior high age, and we assume it's her problems. And she's acting out, and they show her in bits and pieces in the real world. We can see she's an angry young teenager. Yeah, very typical.
Actually, when I first saw it, I thought that her mother might have been dead, because they show a couple of clips of her playing with the Barbie, and in each one you can't see the mother's face.
Yeah.
So I thought that was them kind of choreographing maybe the mother died, and that's why this girl is acting out and thinking about death. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, it turns out actually it's from, those memories are from the mother's point of view. That's why you can't see her face. From the mother's point of view,
yeah. And she's a fascinating character. In fact, I would go so far as to say this is not a movie about Barbie. This is a movie about Gloria. This is Gloria's story. And Gloria is played by America Ferrera. And we are going to try very hard to call this character Gloria, but we keep referring to her as America, which is a Proustian. No. So anyway. So there's a chase scene that's hilarious. I think it's one of those. It kind of comes in the middle of the film when they're chasing Barbie, and it's like Keystone Cops choreography. It's hilarious. There are a lot of points in it where they're references that children would not get. So that's what I love about this film. It kind of reminds me of Aladdin. I don't know if you remember seeing Aladdin when you were 3 years old when it came out, and we took you and your playgroup friends to see it, and we weren't sure that you'd be able to sit through it, because 3 is pretty young to sit through a long movie, but the kids loved it, and the parents were laughing hysterically because of Robin Williams. I love those kind of films where young people of all ages get something out of it. They get some of the references, and maybe they come back 10 years later and they get the rest of the references. Because if you were to watch Aladdin today, you would get all those references that the other parents and I were laughing about. Anyway, so they failed to bring her back, but in the middle of this, she and America Ferrera's character Gloria kind of connect, and during the course of this, Gloria and her daughter, whose name I cannot come up with, Sasha, are at a point in their relationship where a lot of mothers and daughters find themselves. There's a lot of conflict. It's contentious, and they're not connecting. Yeah. So the process of them helping Barbie helps them to connect with one another, and we can talk about that a little bit more later on. And I'm not really sure I guess it's when they get back to Barbie Land. So they eventually decide they have to go back to Barbie Land. That's where they have to fix things. And she invites Gloria and her daughter Sasha to come with her. So they get back there, and we get the speech. And I'm sure there's some lead up to it. Do you remember what the lead up is?
The lead up is basically Barbie's complete breakdown. So that they get back to Barbie Land, and this is when they discover that Ken has beaten them back there and has instituted his version of horse patriarchy.
Oh, we should explain that he went with her. He was kind of
he snuck along.
He snuck along. He was what's that called when you
stowaway?
There you go. He was a stowaway. Yeah. And he convinces her to let him come along. Well, he has a completely different learning curve. He has a completely different awakening, epiphany when he goes to the real world, because he sees that men are in charge, and he brings he leaves her. He leaves her to figure out her stuff on her own, and he goes back to Barbie Land before she does. He beats her back there and basically teaches all the other Kens that men should be in charge, and they take over, and they brainwash all the women.
And they brainwash all the Barbies.
All the Barbies, yeah. And that's another question is, how do they manage to do that? But anyway, so she has a breakdown, you were saying.
So they get back and they discover that all of the Barbies have been brainwashed, and Ken has stolen Barbie's house, and Barbie basically just has a complete breakdown. It's too much for her. She doesn't want to be the one to fix it, and she doesn't feel like she's good enough. And they do end up bringing her back to Weird Barbie's weird house, and this is where we see all of the other outcasts. But it's while they're there. Margot Robbie also does this kind of incredible physical thing where she slumps in a Barbie way, like she's almost like turning her body. She's like holding her body stiffly the way a Barbie would.
She does.
Like falls over at a completely perfect like right angle, like how a Barbie would sit. And so they're carrying her around like this, and her way of showing this physically is like how a Barbie would be, not able to move, super stiff.
She's completely demoralized and has just lost all will to live, all will to go on. Yeah.
The thing that she says specifically right before the speech is something like, "I'm not good enough for everything." And she's also, it's not just about what happened in Barbie Land, it's also about what she saw in the real world, because she did also see that women are not treated very well in the real world, and women aren't the president. And so she kind of lists these things. I can't be the president. I'm not the president. I'm not the Supreme Court. I'm not anything. I'm not good enough for anything.
Not good enough for anything.
That is when Gloria goes into her speech, because she recognizes it.
She does. And she sits down and talks to her, but also to her daughter, and to every woman sitting in the movie theater. And this is what she says. It is literally impossible to be a woman. We have to always be extraordinary, but somehow we're always doing it wrong. You have to be thin, but not too thin. And you can't say you want to be thin. You have to say you want to be healthy. But you also have to be thin. You have to have money, but you can't ask for money because that's crass. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. You're supposed to love being a mother, but don't talk about your kids all the damn time. Boy, that's the truth. You have to be a career woman, but also always be looking out for other people. You have to answer for men's bad behavior, which is insane. But if you point that out, you're accused of complaining. You're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much or that you threaten other women, because you're supposed to be a part of the sisterhood. But always stand out and always be grateful. But never forget that the sisterhood is rigged. So find a way to acknowledge that, but also always be grateful. You have to never get old. Never be rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line. It's too hard. It's too contradictory, and nobody gives you a medal or says thank you. And it turns out, in fact, that not only are you doing everything wrong, but also everything is your fault. I'm just so tired of watching myself and every other single woman tie herself into knots so that people will like us. And if all of that is also true for a doll, just representing a woman, then I don't even know. And it was so good. I mean, I was sobbing by the time she was done. Like you said, everybody in the theater was crying. Every woman in the theater was crying. I don't know how many men were in the theater those first few weekends, those first few weeks. but women relate to this.
Yes.
And they captured every bit of it. Every bit of it in the speech. How difficult, how literally impossible it is to be a woman because it's such a double standard for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
For everything. Yeah, this was the moment where everybody in both screenings that I went to collapsed into tears.
Mm-hmm.
As in particular, the second screening that I went to where I was by myself, I was like a couple seats down from this girl who was just having the time of her life, but in an existential way. She just like, from that moment on until like the end of the movie, she was just like sobbing.
Yeah, but it was also a rallying cry. I mean,
Yes.
it was sad to acknowledge the truth of everything she said, but I was also very hopeful and smiling amidst the tears because it's a rallying cry. These are the problems. We need to fix them, and we can fix them, but it's going to require a major cultural change in America and across the globe. Yeah. It's not just in America.
In the movie, the speech is how they de-brainwashed. It's how they unbrainwash all of the Barbies.
Good point.
Just hearing the speech. And I think that was an intentional point because when she first gives the speech, we cut over to a Barbie that they had been trying to deprogram. And she just, no one is paying attention to her because they're all paying attention to Gloria. But she says, wait, I did write a book. I did that myself. It's like just hearing that speech, it's this moment of recognition. It's like on some level, it's just enough that somebody recognized the struggle. You know, that in itself is something that most women don't experience. Maybe saying these things out loud doesn't fix them in and of itself, but it's the first step to just acknowledge it and to be seen and heard in this kind of all-encompassing way, to be completely seen.
Completely seen. And it's a turning point in the movie, and it's a turning point for Gloria and Sasha, because Sasha begins to respect her mother, and Gloria begins to understand, you know, she's been drawing pictures and submitting ideas to Mattel apparently her entire career that she's worked for them, and she's still like we have to assume she's a secretary or receptionist.
She's an executive assistant, I think.
That's it, yeah. So at that point, they were able to, over the course of the next 5 or 10 minutes or so, unbrainwash all the Barbies. They went, there's an election the next day. The Kens have decided they're going to change the Constitution and make it Ken land instead of Barbie land.
Yes.
And so there's going to be a vote. Well, they distract the Kens, and they had this whole dance scene, which when I was first watching it, the first time I saw it, I thought, this is supposed to be a movie about Barbie and women. Why are we spending 15 minutes watching Ken dance and talk about how he's Ken and he's, you know, who he is and how he's finding himself? No. This is not about. But the point behind that scene, I think, is they're trying to keep him distracted while they deprogram all the Barbies and get them ready to vote. So by the time that the Kens, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there's a couple of different points. I do think that is functionally the point, because what they do is they say that they're gonna play on the Kens' petty jealousies with each other,
right?
And while they're distracted by that, they're gonna retake over the government. And I think that is meant to be a reflection of how patriarchy works. It gets women to focus on their petty jealousies of each other and distract them with that so that they never actually band together and take power. And I think that's also why we focus on Ken so much at the end, because Ken's position in Barbie Land is much more similar to most women's positions in the real world, especially when you think about women who end up completely defining themselves by their romantic relationship with one man. I think Ken's whole journey at the end there is a reflection of a journey that is more common for women than men in the real world. I have known women who have defined themselves completely through their romantic partner, and that's a bad way to be. And in this story, Ken represents that storyline, that process of not having your own identity, in part because you live inside of a power structure that doesn't care about you and doesn't want you to have power. So your only way of having power is to identify yourself as an extension of a person with power.
Yeah. And that's been historically true for women.
Yes, exactly. Women seeing their only form of validation being getting married to a man. You know, think about how much emphasis we place on weddings, and how like a wedding is like a woman's best day of her life. Not necessarily a man's, but it's supposed to be the woman's best day of her life because that's the day where she got a man, and that, more than anything else that she achieves herself, is what is supposed to give her life meaning. And so I think that's why Ken gets so much emphasis, especially towards the end, because none of the Barbie characters are like that, right? Like, in a way, none of the Barbie characters are like real women, you know, which is not me saying that all women go through this, but some women do. A lot of women do, and that is a thing that a lot of women have to deal with at some point, is figuring out how to define themselves without a man in a world that doesn't really want them to do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's why, although I will say this was my third time watching the movie, and I did have less patience for Ken this time around. I did just kind of not really care that much about when he was on screen. Everything else was still fantastic. But I sort of disliked Ken more than I had the first two times I watched it, and had less patience for him. But that being said, I think that is the point of his role. Is in general, as a society, we place a lot of emphasis on the importance of a romantic relationship. We place a lot more importance on a romantic relationship than, say, friendships. You know, men definitely tend to struggle with, I mean, it's like a noted phenomenon that men struggle with breakups more than women because they tend to not have as many friends. So it's definitely something that both men and women struggle with. But in terms of how Ken's journey is specifically presented, it's about him not knowing who he is and not placing any importance on his own identity until the end. That being said, I do kind of feel like his resolution takes a bit longer than I would like. If I have any complaints about the movie, it's just how much emotional work Barbie has to do for him in like the last scene.
Exactly. That is, I think I could have dealt with the long musical interlude if she hadn't still had to spend 10 minutes encouraging him and reassuring him that you can be somebody. You can be Ken, you know, whatever. I really did. I felt that they were trying to, so what they were doing may speak to some of my questions. So I do think there's some questions I have about the movie in general. So first question was, what exactly constitutes female agency? You know, that seems to be one of the themes, and Greta Gerwig has talked about this in interviews. Is it being a mother? Is it having a career? Is it having everything? Is it just having what you set out to work for? You know, I think it's opportunity, you know, having the opportunity to pursue creative, interpersonal goals. Yeah. But in the end, is the ending the movie with her seeing her gynecologist? And this speaks to the first question as well. And we should say that at the end of the movie, the very last scene is she's nervous about something and she's in the car. Gloria's trying to reassure her, and we think that she's going to be going to a job interview or something. Yeah. But she gets out of the car and she walks in and she's there to see her gynecologist. And I laughed at this because I thought, of course she is. Yeah. That's what happens when you're real. You get a fucking period. So she's got her period. She's going to see a gynecologist. But is it also kind of a pro-motherhood signal? I don't have a problem with pro-motherhood themes because I am pro-motherhood. I'm a mother, and I think that is one of the possibilities of a woman's life. And that a lot of times, I think it's very sad right now that young women and men are seeing it as so much of a burden that they don't think they're going to be able to do it. And I think for a good portion of the population, parenting is a wonderful experience and a way to see your life in others and be reminded of what it is to be human. Parenting can be very, very important. Not for everybody. It's not for everybody. But both Gloria and Ruth Handler's character in the movie seem to be very pro-motherhood. So I don't know if that's an underlying theme here.
I mean, I think the movie very much did not want to exclude mothers. I think the movie simultaneously did not want Barbie to end up becoming a mother, but also did not want to exclude mothers. And I think that's why Gloria and Sasha's relationship is so important, and, you know, part of why Ruth is there. Ruth Handler being the actual, if we didn't say this, the actual creator of Barbie, is also a character in the movie played by Rhea Perlman, and she basically allows Barbie to become human at the end. I'm going to say I don't think that Barbie going to the gynecologist is about motherhood at all, because I think women, I mean, like, yes, that's in there, but every woman has to go to the gynecologist whether she wants to be a mother or not. That's just something you have to do if you have a vagina, and Barbie did not used to have a vagina, because Barbies don't. But now she does, because she's human. I think, I honestly don't think it's that much. Well, I was going to say, I don't think it's that much deeper than that, but I think they wanted to have a final moment that made it clear that Barbie is living her life as a real person that wasn't necessarily dependent on deciding exactly what her future was going to be. Because if they show her going to an interview, and I do think you're kind of meant to think that maybe it's an interview, but if they show her going to an interview, then they have to decide what her career is going to be, and that just immediately gets so messy. Like, she's stereotypical Barbie. She's not a Barbie who had a pre-decided career, and I think part of the point of her becoming human / metaphorically becoming an adult is that her options are open to her now. So we don't really want to end the movie by saying, oh, this is what her ending is going to be. She kind of, the point of the ending of the movie is that she hasn't yet found her ending. That's kind of a whole different movie, is Barbie figuring out what her job is going to be. But going to the gynecologist is just something that women have to do. And it is kind of a coming-of-age ritual. We don't treat it like it's a ritual, but,
you know,
it's not
fun. It's not fun.
It's not fun.
So I think that's another point, is that there's a lot of good stuff that comes with being a human, but there's a lot of difficult stuff too. And going to the gynecologist represents that. It's both potentially wonderful, because she, you know, is human now. She could become a mother, but it's also difficult. You know, you mentioned Rhea Perlman playing Ruth Handler. There's another, the reason I thought Ruth Handler had just died a few years before was that there's a moment in the scene in the real world, when Barbie has gone back to the real world, that she's sitting at a bus stop, and there's an older woman sitting next to her, and I thought that was Ruth Handler, but I think she is somebody. I can't remember who she is, but they use this woman who's not an actress, but I remember she's somebody important to the history of Barbie or something. Anyway, so they're sitting at the bus stop, and Barbie's kind of sitting there looking contemplative, and she turns to the woman, and I don't know if they have an exchange first, but the woman turns to her, and she looks at her, and the camera looks at her, and we're sitting there for probably 3 or 4 seconds looking at this woman's face, and right before she says it, I'm thinking, and this woman is like 90, and she's got age spots, and her hair is gray and flat, and I'm looking at her, and after a few seconds, and it takes a few seconds, but I started to think, wow, she's beautiful. And then Barbie says it, you are beautiful. And what does the woman say to her?
I know it.
I know it. Anyway, that was a great scene, and that's why I was thinking that the creator was still alive, but she's not. She's been dead since
2002.
Yeah.
So, well, and that actually brings me to one of my points, which I feel like the point of that scene is, it's not just that woman is beautiful, but that aging itself is beautiful.
Yes,
and I think
life is beautiful.
Life is beautiful, and that's kind of the point of the ending, where Barbie decides to be a person. Is like, life is messy, and what is it? Weird Barbie tells her, before long you'll be sad and mushy and complicated, because that's what humans are. But Barbie decides that that's beautiful, and that's what she wants. And so that's, I think, the gynecologist thing is just kind of the final embracing of all of the messiness that is being a human being. Which, what I love about this movie is that it's not just about being a woman, it's also about existential dread. And so rarely is a movie about both. Usually if you get a movie about being a woman, it doesn't also deal with, like, fear of death and, like, thoughts of existential dread.
And they just throw it in kind of lightly, but it throw it in 2 or 3 times consistently. It never goes away. It's just like the fear of death never goes away.
Background radiation, just like it is in all of our lives. We all know that we will die. It's always there. We try not to think about it, but it's always there. And this movie captures that feeling so well.
And yet moves on, because after you have that dread moment, you move on. Because what's the point of living with dread? Sorry, Woody Allen, but what's the point of living with dread the rest of your fucking life when you can be out there enjoying it? What, as Jimmy Buffett said in one of his songs, we may only get 60 good years. So make the most of it.
And that does bring me to, I just want to talk about this briefly, but I sent you an SNL clip before we started recording. This is my favorite SNL clip. It's called Barbie Instagram SNL. It's from 5 years ago. So I guess that was like 2018, 2019. It's an episode that Donald Glover hosted. The sketch is just 5 minutes long, and it's basically just a group of interns are being asked to come up with captions for Barbie's new Instagram account, and Donald Glover's character keeps coming up with these horrific existential dread captions.
With 4 years ago, straight face. He doesn't smile. He doesn't laugh.
I keep thinking about that moment 4 years ago when I watched that girl get hit by a car in front of my dream house. And it just like slowly unravels to like someone tells Barbie that she's a toy, and it causes this spike of existential dread, and then she's going to commit suicide because of it.
Yeah.
It's my favorite SNL sketch, and after my partner and I left the movie the first time, we both looked at each other and we were like, that was kind of like the movie-long version of that SNL sketch.
It is. I wonder if it had something to do with Greta's idea of coming to life.
I could, I mean, I could see it being either way. It could just be... It could be that she saw the sketch and was like, oh, I could turn that into the best movie you've ever seen. Or it could just be that they're both, because they both, for me, hit on this feeling. And I'm wondering if maybe this feeling was just like in the zeitgeist, and that's why we got these two pieces of media. But this feeling of disconnect, when the kind of that moment that you start to outgrow things like Barbie and these toys that present this very perfect but flat image of life, and the disconnect between that and your growing sad, mushy, complicated feelings as you become an adult. I feel like both this movie and that sketch do this really good job of hitting on that. The contrast between perfect Barbie and thoughts of death.
Yeah.
And how that encapsulates, becoming an adult. I think part of the process of becoming an adult is realizing that you will die, realizing that life isn't perfect, and that we all die, and we're all just trying to like figure out how to live our best lives until that happens. And that contrast of what the world really is versus kind of what we try to tell children it is, because we try to protect children from the worst parts of life and from knowledge of death, even though that's, eventually they have to know. But these toys seem to represent our attempts to put a perfect face on life, and the moment that you become an adult is the moment that you see behind that face,
I do. And the other thing that I think that they kind of hint at in various places, and they don't really, they do kind of spell it out, but they don't talk about it. And it goes back to Ken's role in the movie and in Barbie Land and in life and everything, and that is that there in Barbie Land there is an imbalance. It's a reverse imbalance of what's happening in the real world. So do we feel sorry for Ken during those scenes when he's clearly he's so flat and Barbie is so full of life? By the end of the movie, do we hope that this will become an equal society? Because in my mind, if it doesn't become an equal society, this is just going to keep happening, kind of like in the real world. Until we become an equal society for men and women and for all ethnicities, so that, people all have the same opportunities and are treated, justly and kindly. Until we have that world, we're always going to be experiencing, moments of terror, moments of revolution, moments of unfair and unjustifiable death, early death for people. So I think all of that is kind of an underlying theme, because at the end, that was my question in those last scenes with Ken, is they have to correct this imbalance. As much as I hate to say it, because Ken is not interesting to me, but that's part of the problem. If you make Ken a more interesting doll, if you make him a more interesting human, then it won't be then you won't feel so bad about him having a 15-minute dance at the end of the movie, because it will mean something to you.
I think part of the reason that they don't completely corrected at the end is that it's kind of an echo of Barbie's ending. None of this is truly over. None. There is no definitive ending here. The point is just to live your life striving for that better version of the world, but we may never successfully get there.
At least in our lifetimes.
Exactly.
It's going to happen in Star Trek land. We know that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Star Trek tells us that it's going to happen.
In Gene Roddenberry's future, everything is perfect and everyone is bisexual. But in our current real world, we may not get there, but that doesn't mean that you stop trying.
Well, and that's a great segue into the themes of the movie. I think the big one is, and this is a line in the movie, and I cannot remember who said it, but I suspect that it was Gloria. And it's that even if you can't make it perfect, you can make it better. So I think that's a big theme in the movie, and it should be a big theme for our lives as we and I will just make a political statement here and say, as we go forward into 2024, which is going to be a difficult year for anybody with a brain in this country. It's gonna be hard for us. There's gonna be a lot of stuff happening, and I think we have to just try to make it better, even if we can't make it perfect. And of course, the other thing I just talked about with Ken is that everything in the real world exists, and this is a line that Ken actually speaks. Everything exists to expand and elevate the presence of men. And he says that about the real world. And this is a kind of truth that we don't always see because it so infects our everyday world so completely that we don't always see how privileged and how elevated the presence of men is over women. But it happens all the time. And I've gotten to a point in my life at 65 where I don't hesitate to point it out to people. People start telling me about how great the Scorsese film is. And I have decided I don't care. This is what I think. I think that he has been allowed to make films way beyond the point where he should have been, when there should have been more Greta Gerwig's making films. But we don't see that as an imbalance. We don't see that as elevating the presence of men. But it is, because his stories are all made. His movies are made by men, and they are always stories about men. Has he ever made a movie about a woman? So, and the last theme that I really love is the focus on differentness. Gloria says at one point, I'm weird and I'm dark and I'm crazy. And then there are other parts of the movie where in Barbie Land where it's kind of sometimes bland. So there's contrast the prettiness but the blandness of Barbie Land with America Ferrera being weird, dark, and crazy, and weird Barbie being weird and her face being colored and her hair being, crazy. Then we've got the dreamlike landscapes contrasted with Muscle Beach in Venice when they first come into the real world, and in those beach scenes, you have people who look at Barbie and Ken and think these people are weird, and then you have other people looking at them who just accept what they see. It's different. Yes. It's just what it is.
Although I think they made a pointed effort, because I was watching this pretty carefully this time. All of the actual compliments that are said out loud are directed at Ken, not at Barbie. And I think that was purposeful.
Yeah. Okay.
Also, in a sad moment of real life imitating art, apparently when they filmed that scene, the reactions that they got in real life were very similar. A lot of people were coming up to Ryan Gosling and being like, cool, man. And people were just like leering at Margot Robbie or like shooting her dirty looks. So when they filmed that scene, and you could kind of see it in the coverage at the time, that people were like, wow, so cool that Ryan Gosling is willing to dress like this. But then all of the coverage of Margot Robbie was like, she's really gonna wear that? That's crazy. This movie must be crazy.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh my God, guys.
and following up on that, almost immediately after the opening weekend of the movie, people were saying almost immediately that Ryan Gosling should be nominated for an Academy Award. And nobody said that about Margot Robbie.
Oh my God. I think I maybe didn't tell you this at the time because I didn't want to ruin your day, but Dozy and I drove by a movie theater that clearly only showed like one movie at a time, and their marquee said Ryan Gosling's Barbie. I was so mad. I'm so mad.
Oh, wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I almost stopped the car and turned around and burned that building to the ground.
Everything exists to expand and elevate the presence of men. And this is words.
Yep.
These are words from Ken. They
Mhm.
anyway. So yeah. So those are my themes. And
Yeah.
the questions. All I have left, and we don't really have time to get into it, are some interesting and weird things that happen in the movie. But it's your turn to give your summary before we go on to that, if we have time.
Yeah, I'll just see if I can run through some of my final points. So I did want to bring up this one line that I've thought a lot about, and I have mixed feelings on it. It's Ruth Handler's line, "We mothers stand still so our daughters can look back and see how far they've come."
I didn't
And
understand that one at all.
So this time around, and this is why before we recorded, I asked you if Ruth Handler was still alive and then looked it up. She's dead. And I asked that because I think the way that I can understand this line best is more if it's referring to people who are already dead. Because the only people who stand still are people who are dead. And if you think about it that way, like our foremothers stand still so that we can see how far we've come. That to me makes a little bit more sense. And Ruth Handler is in reality dead. Once you die, your life is what it is. It's kind of nothing else can really change it. It is what it is, and it contributed to the world the way that it did. And it's the people who are still alive that can still change things and can look back on that as a benchmark. That's the best way that I can think of it, because I honestly think if you take it literally, it sort of feels like it flies in the face of the rest of the movie, because I feel like so much of the rest of the movie is about the fact that mothers don't stand still. Mothers still have life left, and I think the only people who stand still are the ones who are dead. That's kind of the only thing that really ends our possibility.
I do not understand why the line is in the movie, and it's a problem for the movie. There's no reason why she shouldn't. Who is it? Rhea Handler? Rhea Perlman?
Rhea Perlman.
Playing Ruth Handler.
Yes.
It's a line that makes no sense to me, because we stand back to not get in their way. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I didn't like it the first time. I didn't like it the second time.
I think it makes a certain amount of sense, but I'm not sure that it was phrased the right way, because I think she's saying like previous generations stand as a benchmark for you to see.
No, that makes more sense. Yeah,
you can come. And then I guess like the only other thing I would want to do is talk about our hot takes.
Sure. I don't have hot takes, but I found a couple things to be interesting and funny. And the scenes where they're with the weird Barbie and there are other Barbies there, the Misfits, I was reminded of the Island of Misfit Toys from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. That's what this... I really think that's what she's trying to pull forward. Yeah. And then another movie and she did say this, now that I'm remembering it, there was an interview with Greta where she talked about all the influences that helped her create this movie. And I wish I'd reread that before we sat down to talk, but there were a lot of them, like the dancing movies with what's his name?
Didn't she say like Singing in the Rain was one of
them? Yeah, Singing in the Rain, yeah. But there's also a point where towards the end of the film where I guess Gloria's talking to her daughter and talking about herself, and they're having a conversation about how they can move forward and what they're going to be able to do with their lives. And Gloria's daughter says, "What about Barbie?" Mm-hmm. That's reminiscent of the end of The Wizard of Oz. What about Dorothy?
Yeah.
So I do think she did that a lot in the film. We could sit down and pick all those out. But she does. She's the kind of filmmaker who has watched a lot of movies. They influence her. She pays homage to them. But anyway, I just thought that those were kind of some of the interesting things. There was one other thing here. Shining. Do you remember the scene in the car where the daughter says to her mother, and is it Barbie? I'm not sure. But she says, "Are you two shining right now?" I don't know what that meant. I had to look it up.
Okay.
So
I missed that, but I do know what it means. So in the movie The Shining.
The
Shining is psychic ability, is what it means. The Shining is psychic ability. It
Mystical.
There's like a
Okay.
sequel.
So
Yeah.
it's a reference to the mystical ability to establish a telepathic connection
Yes.
in Stephen King's horror story. And by the way, I think we have found a way in almost every one of our conversations to mention Mr. King. Kudos to Mr. King. But yeah, so he's asking her mom if she and Barbie are shining. And it was like, you kind of could intuit what it meant, but it really was not a term that I had ever heard before. Anyway, that was pretty funny.
Since you brought it up again, I just want to say that Stephen King apparently does not like the movie version of The Shining because he thinks that Kubrick's interpretation of the main female character was extremely sexist. So, anyway.
And once again, let's just wrap this up with Stanley Kubrick, shall we?
Let's just shit on Stanley Kubrick for a while.
Let's do that, yeah.
Okay, so my hot takes. Honestly, I have two hot takes on this movie. The first is that I think this is the funniest movie I've ever seen. I think I had laughed more at this movie than any other movie I have ever seen. And I've watched it 3 times now, and last night I maybe laughed even more than the first time I watched it. And my partner watched it with me again last night, and he had also seen it. I guess at this point it's been 6 months since we'd last seen it, but he was laughing just as much as we were in the theater.
It's very witty, lots of references, yeah.
So funny, so layered, and none of it, at least as of now, none of it are jokes. Because, like, I can go back and watch some other older funny movies and they'll still be funny, but they'll inevitably have some moment where you're like, oh, that's just a joke that gay people are gross or something, And I feel like none of that kind of humor is, who knows, maybe 20 years from now, who knows what'll be considered out of date then. But I think this is the funniest movie I've ever seen. And my other hot take is that I have a hard time understanding how anyone does not like this movie, and it forces me to conclude that either they are incapable of enjoying something that is so unabashedly over the top that they are in some ways cut off from joy, or that they are just cut off from allowing themselves to enjoy anything that is for women.
I think that is absolutely correct. That last statement, I think that's a big part of it. And that would be true for men and women. And I think it's because we are so brainwashed, like the Barbies, to consider men's movies and men's stories as legitimate, and women's movies and women's stories as not legitimate. And this extends to music and to books. I mean, how many women comic book writers are there out there? It's just like we have been reduced. We make up 50% of the population. Statistically, we should be making up 50% of the artistic output. And we might, but it's not seen. And, artistic output is not seen or experienced by anybody. It's almost pointless. We're swept under the rug, and our stories are not important. But our stories are important. The other thing that I love about the movie, and I just kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but all the cultural references, all the references to music and movies, and those 2 homages, but also specific references. There's a quote where somebody says to somebody, "You haven't seen The Godfather? This movie is a rich blend of Coppola's aesthetic genius and a triumph for Robert Evans and the architecture of the 70s studio structure." And you and I have had this conversation about these movies from the 70s, because I think the 70s was a kind of a revolutionary time in American cinema. It's when the American cinema came into its own. And there's a lot of reason for that. It's all men. I am the first one to say that. But that doesn't mean that it isn't, that the voices during that time weren't creating new ways to look at movies, new ways to tell stories. But boy, the architecture of the 70s studio structure really got to me.
The joke there that these men love these movies so much that they want to talk over them the first time you watch them. Because that's what she says. She comes in and she's like, "You want to start it over and talk over the whole thing?"
Yes.
And also, I think it's Issa Rae.
It's distracting. It's one of the distractions.
It's Issa Rae as President Barbie, and the way that she delivers, she comes in and she says, "Are you watching The Godfather?" The way that she delivers that word cracks me up so hard. Godfather? And it's like, yeah, The Godfather. Like, she doesn't even know how to pronounce Godfather.
And it's funny that you say that, because I rewatched that exchange 3 times trying to figure out why he repeats the question. I did not notice how she pronounced it. Like, what the hell is going on here?
Are you watching The Godfather?
And then he corrects her with The Godfather. Anyway, so those are my takes, is that there's a lot of cultural references. I think for such a young person, because Greta is just a little bit older than you, maybe she's right at your age. She might be like 37 or 38. She's very young. She has a lot of cultural references in here that you would think for a filmmaker, the movie ones, yeah. But some of the others, I'm like astounded. And she wrote this. Yeah. They put these cultural references in there. And I just think it's hilarious sometimes and wonderful. One of the best films I've seen in a long time. Certainly the best movie. And I will say it out loud. It was the best movie of 2023. I don't care what anybody says.
As of recording, we don't know if it's going to win the Oscar.
That's what we should end on. Is we're into award season now.
Yeah, we're into award season. It didn't win Best Picture for the Golden Globes, right?
It didn't win anything for the Golden Globes except a special category that was created, I think, just so they could give the Barbie movie some attention. And it was basically spoke to box office, but also movie making. So best movie making, that's not the right term, but it was something like that. Movie making and box office effects. So basically, he made a movie that a lot of people like.
Yeah, also just like, I don't know, annoyance to me personally. I think I can't remember if it was the Oscars, the Golden Globes, but for one of them, it was put up for Best Adapted Screenplay instead of Best Original Screenplay, because technically Barbie already exists. This is an original screenplay.
Absolutely,
it's not adapted from anything.
That's like saying The Godfather. Well, actually, The Godfather was adapted, but
The Godfather is an actual adaptation.
It was an actual book. Yeah.
So yeah, we'll keep an eye on the awards, but we don't have super high hopes for the Oscars and Barbie, even though we both think it was the best movie of 2023. There isn't even really any competition. But I have hated the Oscars for a long time. I do remember when I gave up on the Oscars, and it was the year that Crash won the Best Picture Oscar instead of Brokeback Mountain. Pretty much gave up on the Oscars right then and there, and every year for me is just sort of a torture test as I watch movies get nominated and watch the actual best movies of the year either not win the award or not even get nominated. So we'll see.
Yeah, so it's a frustrating time of year for all of us who actually can take movies seriously, but we have gone way too long. So that, dear listeners, is all for today.
I'm Tess Adair. You can find me at my website, tessadair.com, or you can sign up for my email list, or you can follow me on Instagram at author.tess.adair, or on TikTok at author.tess.adair. Or you can find us at Patreon, patreon.com/whereyoulead.
And I'm Beth Von Barron. You can follow me on Instagram at STL_writer_Beth, or sign up for my weekly Substack email, Saturday Morning Musings, at stlwriterbeth.substack.com. This has been Women Inherit the Earth, a discussion podcast about women in movies from the perspective of a mother and daughter. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll tune in for our next episode in about 2 weeks. See you then.